You've all heard the number, right? 2 degrees Celsius. For what feels like forever, it's been the big goal, the one single target that was supposed to guide our fight against climate change. But what if that whole plan was built on a shaky foundation? Let's dig in.
I mean, really think about that for a second. What if the plan that the entire world has been banking on was basically a fantasy from day one? It's a pretty jarring thought, but it's the question we're going to tackle right now.
Okay, so to get to the bottom of this, we have to start with the physics. No opinions, no politics, just the cold, hard data about what's happening to our planet's energy balance.
And it all boils down to this concept called radiative forcing. You can just think of it as the planet's heat switch. Every time we add more greenhouse gases to the atmosphere, we're basically turning up that switch, trapping more of the sun's energy and forcing the planet to get hotter.
So how much have we turned up that switch? Well, this number is our grade. It's from NOAA's annual Greenhouse Gas Index, which basically measures the warming influence today compared to a 1990 baseline. And, well, the grade is not exactly an A+.
That's right, a 51% increase. In just a little over 3 decades, we've cranked up that global heat switch by half. And remember, 1990 was supposed to be the start of when we got serious about turning it down.
And this, right here, is what shows you the sheer speed of what's happening. It took about 240 years from the start of the Industrial Revolution all the way to 1990 to reach that baseline level of warming. But it took us just 33 years to add the next 51% on top of that. We're not just warming up, we're accelerating. We've slammed our foot on the gas.
This chart really drives it home. It's based on work by the legendary climate scientist James Hansen, and it shows that the rate of heating is itself speeding up. The amount of heat we're now adding in a single decade used to take much, much longer. We are not on some gentle upward slope. We're on a rocket.
So, if the physics show a planet accelerating towards a cliff, how in the world did we land on 2 degrees as our target? To figure that out, we have to step out of the world of physics and into the world of politics.
And here's the secret that doesn't get talked about enough. 2 degrees wasn't some magic number discovered by scientists. It was a compromise. It was a nice, round, convenient number that politicians could understand and that scientists could, well, work with. It was a symbol first, and the science to back it up came later.
And once that number was out there, it just took on a life of its own. It started as a vague idea in the 70s, got picked up as a guardrail in the 90s, and then, before you know it, it's the centerpiece of the Paris Agreement. It became the global standard. The only problem was, they still hadn't really figured out a plausible way to meet it.
And that is where the story takes a really wild turn. Because to make the numbers for a 2-degree world actually add up, the people building the roadmaps had to basically invent a miracle that lived inside a computer.
They use these massive computer models called integrated assessment models, or IAMs. You can think of them like a giant game of SimCity for the entire planet. They combine climate science, energy systems, and global economics to try and find the cheapest, most efficient path to a specific goal, like staying under 2 degrees. And the process looks pretty logical on the surface. You tell the model the target, then you tell it about the economy. But then the models kept hitting a wall. They showed that cutting emissions fast enough, right now, would be incredibly expensive and disruptive. So they needed a workaround, a kind of get-out-of-jail-free card.
And this was it. This was the magic fix. To avoid the pain of drastic cuts today, the models just penciled in a massive bet on the future. They basically assumed that decades from now, we would have some incredible technology that could act like a giant vacuum cleaner for the sky and just suck billions of tons of CO2 out of the air.
The leading candidate for this miracle technology was something called BECCS. The idea sounds kind of cool, almost like science fiction. You grow vast forests of trees or crops, you burn them for energy, but then you capture the carbon dioxide from the smokestack and bury it deep underground. If you do it right, you've generated power while removing CO2 from the atmosphere.
So just how big of a bet were these models making on BECCS? Well, in many of the core scenarios, they assumed we'd be removing 12.1 times billion tons of CO2 every single year. Let's be clear, this isn't a small-scale backup plan. This is a bet-the-planet kind of gamble on a technology that, today, barely exists at any meaningful scale. To give you a sense of how absolutely massive that number is, 12.1 billion tons is more than the entire global power sector emits today. So the models assumed that on top of a complete global transition to zero-carbon energy, we would also build an entirely new global industry from scratch that was the size of our current power sector but running in reverse. It's just a staggering assumption.
And this is where it stops being a technical issue and becomes a deeply ethical one. As the scientists Kevin Anderson and Glenn Peters pointed out years ago, by relying on a magical fix that may never show up, we're just kicking the can down the road. We are, in their words, shifting a profound mitigation burden onto future generations.
So, let's piece this all together. We have the physics of a planet heating up faster and faster. We have a target that was born out of political convenience. And we have a solution that relies on a technological fantasy. Where in the world does that leave us now?
You know, this wasn't some evil conspiracy. It was more of a systemic failure. You had scientists in one corner, modelers in another, and policymakers in a third, and they weren't always seeing the full picture. The models were designed to find a pathway to 2 degrees Celsius, and then everyone pointed to those models as proof that the 2 degrees Celsius pathway was feasible. It's a dangerously circular logic driven by a desire to avoid making difficult, expensive choices today.
So, maybe we need to reframe how we think about this. Maybe the big story isn't, oh no, we're failing to meet our climate targets. Maybe the real story is that we were given a target, a plan, that was never really coherent in the first place.
And that forces us to ask the most important and maybe the most difficult question of all. If we accept that the old plan was built on a fantasy, what does a real, honest climate plan look like? A plan that's grounded in the hard physics and doesn't rely on a miracle to save us down the road. That is the conversation we all need to be having, starting right now.